Hello and welcome to another edition of Kop Talk, Two Jews and Their Views on the News. I'm Bob Cohn, Editor-in-Chief Emeritus of the St. Louis Jewish Light. And with me, as always, is Larry Levin, the publisher and CEO of the Jewish Light, and our managing editor and program producer, Mike Sherwin. As usual, there is no shortage of issues to discuss, so let's get right into it. You and I and Jewish Light editor Ellen Futterman have just returned from the annual conference of the American Jewish Press Association and the General Assembly of the Jewish Federations of North America, where we heard a major policy address by Vice President Joe Biden and a Mideast update from St. Louis native and expert David Makovsky. First of all, please tell our viewers what the AJPA, we throw these initials around, and the Jewish Federations of North America are, and what your own major takeaway was from this weekend.
Wow, that's a mouthful. Well, the American Jewish Press Association is our trade association for Jewish news media across the United States and Canada. We have about 141 members, both individuals and organizations, news organizations. Some of the publications are for-profit, freestanding organizations. Some are non-profit like ours. Some are owned and operated by Jewish federations. And this is a time we come together to talk about editorial issues, business issues, themes of the day, and in this case, kind of how a media organization survives and thrives in a very challenging media environment. The Jewish Federations of North America come together as a group once a year in different cities, about 4 out of every 5 years here in the United States, and then about once every 5 years in Israel. There were between 2,000 and 3,000 attendees at that conference, so it's a much larger conference than ours, but we were able to be with them and learn a lot from them. There certainly was no shortage of discussion points, the Middle East, of course, being one of the focuses that Vice President Biden talked about, David Makovsky talked about, with only the keen insight that someone like him, who has been, a journalist covering it, a think tank guy, a United States representative in negotiations, that only a guy like him can bring to the table.
And he always gives you the straight dope without any kind of left-wing or right-wing and hidden agendas.
Yeah, and he has some opinions, but the fact that he doesn't taint the facts or hide facts, in order to advocate for a position, is incredibly refreshing. He will give you his opinion, and he will certainly acknowledge that there are viewpoints to the other side, and that those viewpoints are credible. But he explains why he thinks the way that he thinks.
And we're proud that he is a St. Louis native.
Absolutely.
In any event, also the Vice President gave a major talk before the 2,300 delegates of the Jewish Federations meeting. Were you reassured about the U.S.-Israel relationship as a result of that talk, or did it change your own views in any ways?
No, I think there's the noise that appears in the media, and then I think there's what happens behind the scenes. I think what happens behind the scenes is, as he indicated, unprecedented defense and military cooperation between the countries. I don't think they've ever shared more in terms of information, in terms of technology, in terms of strategies. So I think that is extremely reassuring, and that will extend beyond any particular presidential administration. So I have great faith in that. In terms of the noise about Bibi and President Obama, yeah, I mean, it's frustrating, and it's probably louder than it's been. But I don't think, and you and I have talked about this, I don't think when push comes to shove, either at the United Nations or otherwise, I don't think there's going to be any separation between the two countries.
And I think the nature of the relationship is such that even if two particular people don't get on well, that the relationship is such that it keeps it that way. And certainly with respect to Joe Biden, and Makovsky pointed out also with respect to John Kerry, they're part of that generation of Democrats who grew up with a very strong embrace of the whole Zionist narrative. Biden spoke very movingly of his association with Holocaust survivors, one of whom introduced him.
Yeah.
So he's the real deal when it comes to
And
that.
as I've said to you, we talked about some people walking out during his talk. Biden's been involved for almost a half century in American public service, for which we should be incredibly grateful and thankful. He's been involved as a ardent supporter of Israel in the United States Senate for that same period of time before he became vice president. So if people don't like the headlines today, that's one thing, but at least acknowledge, honor, and respect how great a friend he's been to the Jewish people in this country and to the Israelis for so many decades.
I agree, and I was personally offended. I was sitting out near the front and saw this group, about 25 or 30 people, who walked out. I didn't think that was in the least bit appropriate. You mentioned how the U.S.-Israel relationship transcends party, and we had a rather significant change with respect to the recent election. The Republicans regained control of the Senate and increased their lead in the House. What impact do you think this is going to have on the U.S.-Israel relationship, and in particular any deal that might be struck with Iran?
Oh, I think there'll be huge pressure to bear by the majority in both houses not to strike any deal that's less than what they perceive to be 100%, and maybe even not even at that point if they believe that they can win political gain from repudiating any prospective deal. I think some marvelous things have happened with respect to Iran, and some of them due to the incredibly repressive sanctions that have been placed upon their economy. It has driven them into severe recession. They've even had to rescind some of the payments that every family gets from the government, which had been considered almost sacred through the years. The question is, once you have that leverage, what do you do with that leverage? Do you keep driving, the thumb screw down, with more and more? Is there a point at which you say, we benefited from the leverage, now let's get the best deal we can? That's up in the air. I don't know. We've had some disturbing news about, what seem to be violations of, the existing kind of nuclear agreements, and that plays into whether or not a deal should be made. People say 100% never trust the Iranians. People say Khomeini makes all the decisions for the country on nuclear policy, which is true. So I can't sit here and say make a deal or don't make a deal. If there's a deal that's presented that we believe is reasonably enforceable, that comes close to guaranteeing a long period of time without proliferation, I'd probably support it. But I think the Republicans can be hawks on, what they think a reasonable deal is, and I have no issue with them doing so.
And the biggest applause line that Biden got was we will not sign a bad deal with Iran. And of course, there are differences of opinion
about what bad means.
What a bad or a good deal.
Yeah, some people may define a deal with Iran as quote bad. So the rhetoric makes a difference.
Based on our own personal conversations, I think you and I might see things just a little bit differently. You might be a little bit more inclined to go for a deal that I might still retain some skepticism about. But if there is a good deal, I would not be opposed to it. It's better than having another violent and unpredictable consequences if Israel were to, God forbid, attack.
Yeah, and a lot of the deal turns on what the other countries are willing to give up. I mean, are they going to restore full speed ahead to the Iranian economy? Are there still going to be touch points or limitations? We haven't seen what that looks like yet. So if it's a deal where Iran can once again kind of deal financially with every country in the world as it sees fit, and there's not an effective enforcement a mechanism, of course I wouldn't support it. It's just the devil's in the details.
Yeah, and there are a couple of other areas of the globe that I want to touch upon. One is there are two different cities, a tale of two cities. One is Jerusalem and the other is Ferguson. We'll start with Jerusalem. Over the past week or 10 days, there's been a huge spike, not in Hamas-claimed killings, but what appeared to be disconnected random killings, stabbings, vehicles being driven into stops at the light rail system. What's going on, and how does this involve the whole Temple Mount controversy?
Well, there are some, I think, who would like to propagate a new intifada. I don't think we're there yet, but I think that's a little bit of the goal, is to create a deliberate disequilibrium. So I think there's that. I think we have Bibi and some of the other ministers, Bibi being Benjamin Netanyahu, I always call him Bibi, but Bibi and the other ministers being very sharply accusatory at Mahmoud Abbas about everything that's going on, and that's, I think, deliberate on two levels. First, it's deliberate to say, you want a state, you're responsible for these people, rein them in. It's also, I think, a little bit intentional because I'm not convinced that Bibi wants a deal, so I think it's helpful for him to lay the blame at the feet of Abbas rather than saying, pointing the finger at Hamas or Muslim Brotherhood or any other groups. So there's kind of a political tension going on there in addition to this kind of anarchical situation that's going on.
And I think Abbas is playing a little bit of the same kind of a game when he says that any alteration of the status quo of the Temple Mount, which Bibi has assured,
being ridiculous.
Could lead to war.
I agree with you totally.
Much closer to home, the community is collectively holding its breath, waiting for the grand jury report on whether or not Dennis Wilson, the Ferguson police officer, will be indicted in connection with the shooting death of Michael Brown. And there have been some rabbis and other people prominent in the Jewish community who have taken part in some of the demonstrations that have occurred thus far. There's also been an effort on the part of some pretty radical folks to equate what's happening in Ferguson to what's been happening in Gaza. It's almost like for Gaza. Your comments on both of those issues. Well, first, as to whether rabbis, is it appropriate for them to take part in such demonstrations?
My personal view is that social justice is a very important part of a rabbi's responsibilities, and each rabbi and each rabbi's relationship with their own congregation, they have to decide what's appropriate in terms of participating. You know, the most prominent rabbis participating are those from Central Reform, but it's nothing new under the sun. They've been involved in community relations in the city and near in suburbs for 30 years.
Exactly.
So it's not like, you know, people say that, are they Johnny-come-lately? Are they trying to garner attention? No, they're doing what they've always been doing. Now, there are others who have put their toes in the water who haven't before, and, you know, I'm curious to hear more about what their communities and their synagogues have to say about that. I personally believe if you have a tikkun olam conviction as a rabbi, it's something you do. Now, that does not in any way, shape, or form excuse anybody from deliberately ignoring facts, you know, from being from showing equanimity in terms of what happens with the judicial process, you know, not assuming certain things, but pointing to overall structural, you know, terrible, terrible issues and injustices in our society. Of course, that's something that we should all do, you know, in ways that are constructive and positive for the community, not tearing down the community.
Well said. And we look back with a lot of pride on Rabbi Jerome Grolman and Rabbi Bernard Lipnick, both of blessed memory, one of UH, one of B'nai Amunah, who actually marched with Martin Luther King, as did the late Bill Cohn, the past exec of the Jewish Federation. And I think we will look back not too far from now on the fact that these rabbis put themselves out there attempting to ameliorate the situation, not to exacerbate the conflict,
yeah. And you asked me about the kind of the glommers on to the protests from you know, Palestinian cause and other causes. I personally find it revolting. I mean, I think we have a true social justice issue here about inequality in American society. We have continuing issues about violence. We have continuing issues about economic injustice in America and how we fix our communities. You know, and for anybody to come in and say, "Oh, great, this is a protest. I'm going to use it as an excuse to propagate, you know, my own cause." I find it offensive.
And I remember Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan's famous quote: "You're entitled to your opinions, but you're not entitled to your own version of the facts." And David Makovsky is an exemplar of somebody who has opinions, states them strongly, but backs up everything with well-researched facts.
And what does it do? What does it do for the cause in Ferguson, however that cause is defined? What does it do if, you know, and I have a strong environmental background, what happens if environmentalists glom on, and Palestinians glom on, and this cause glom? It really dilutes the message.
Absolutely.
Which is, you know, how do we fix this problem that obviously was simmering very close to the surface, you know, that we saw reflected in what happened with Michael Brown.
And we are on the eve of Thanksgiving and not quite as close to Hanukkah as we were last year, but do you have any thoughts you want to share with our viewers and readers as we wind this program
Well,
up?
as you well know, because you've been, you know, living and knowing people in this community longer than me, there are a lot of Jews who call Thanksgiving their favorite Jewish holiday.
Right.
You know, and for me it is an exceedingly warm holiday, and one where we should smile and count our blessings and love our family and our friends, which I do and I know you do.
Yes.
And I wish everybody the best.
Me too, and thank you, Larry Levin, thank you, Michael Sherwin, and thank you to our viewers and readers as we sign off for another edition of Kop Talk.
See you.